of survival, succeed, and transform. And then we applied this theory, which I ultimately wrote about in a book called Peak, into a pyramid, a set of 3 pyramids that address our employee needs, which include at the base of the pyramid, money, the middle of the pyramid, recognition, and the top of the pyramid, the sense of meaning that you get in your work. And interestingly enough, we have one of 3 relationships we can have with our work. It's either a job, a career, or a calling, and it matches this pyramid. Now, that experience of reinterpreting Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs for our company at a time when we were really a gauntlet helped us triple in size. We came through the downturn very successfully. And I learned a lot about psychology in leadership, which was important for me to know because I thought I'd gone through my once-in-a-lifetime downturn, and I hadn't. The once-in-a-lifetime downturn was just around the corner, and it was the one we're in right now. It's the Great Recession. So for those of us here in the Bay Area, we've gone through 2 once-in-a-lifetime downturns in the same decade, right? You know, so hopefully there's not a third one around the corner. But I started reading Viktor Frankl. How many of you have read Man's Search for Meaning or are familiar with it? So it's a famous book, probably the most famous non-religious book ever written on meaning. I started reading it partly because in early 2008, I could see that we were the canary in the coal mine. The hotel business, generally speaking, is the canary in the coal mine. Our revenues start to drop faster than other industries. You stop traveling or staying in a hotel before you stop buying deodorant or underwear, thank God. So we could see in early 2008 this was going to be a historic downturn, and we were growing like gangbusters, and everything felt like, wow, I didn't know. My biggest challenge was not just that we were running out of money. My biggest challenge is that I was running out of meaning. I was losing a sense of meaning in what I was doing. I had had a calling for the work I had that I was doing, and I started to feel like it was just a job. Now, I had felt a bit like a gladiator during the last downturn, during that dot-com boom and bust, when we used Maslow. In this downturn, I felt like a prisoner. And I don't know how many of you out there in the position you're in have felt like a prisoner in your own company. But it happens. And it happens, for me, 22 years into being the CEO of a company that I'd started, I didn't want to be CEO anymore. But I couldn't jump out of the saddle because we were going through a very difficult downturn. On a personal level, the slide goes dark. Let me tell you my personal life for a second. Isn't it interesting that our personal life starts to fall apart when our business life falls apart too? So that's what happened. I had a long-term relationship end against my choice. I had a son going to prison wrongfully. He ended up in San Quentin prison for 8 months, and I had to try to figure out how to get him out. And we did. A federal judge let him out, but he was in prison for 8 months. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And it wasn't just in my life. I had a very close friend named Chip. Now, this is not where I say I'm schizophrenic. This is truthfully a good friend of mine named Chip Hankins, who was our insurance broker for our company. And it was true in 2008, when we went from the good times of 2006 and 2007 to what was starting to be the bad times in 2008, many of us were very quiet about our sense of desperation. Chip was very quiet about his sense of desperation. And unfortunately, this is actually the guy who I would go on long walks with, who would sort of tell me the meaning in life. He was a very thoughtful guy. He was our insurance broker for 12 years. And August 30th, 2008, when I was in St. Louis giving a speech, I got a call about half an hour before going on stage from the CEO of his insurance brokerage company telling me that he had taken his own life. So my friend Chip had committed suicide. And in this downturn between 2008 and 2012, I've had 6 different friends, 4 of them entrepreneurs, take their lives. All men, interestingly. 5 of the 6 of them in their 40s, which is frankly the prime time when a lot of men feel like they're disappointed with their lives. So I was 47 years old when Chip took his life. So I started reading. It was hard to have a friend commit suicide. Hard when they have the same name you have. Hard when you're a little depressed yourself and wondering, okay, how do I get out of this bind that I'm in? So I started reading some more Man's Search for Meaning. There's a really interesting quote in Man's Search for Meaning. So I didn't tell you Viktor Frankl's story, but he was a psychologist in the 1930s who ended up in a concentration camp. He believed that meaning was the fuel of life, and then he got to see it in action and see who died and who didn't in a concentration camp. And what he found is the people who lived were those who found meaning in the worst of circumstances. He had a quote that I'm going to just recite for you right now that is so relevant to us as entrepreneurs. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response, and in your response lies your growth and your freedom. So in essence, what he was saying is, whatever happens in your life, the conditions of your life, between that and how you respond to it or react to it, really defines what kind of life you're going to have. Unfortunately, my friend Chip reacted in the worst of times, and he committed suicide. Well, about a month and a half after Chip committed suicide, I was playing baseball at AT&T Ballpark. Very proud to be saying that today, given where the Giants are right now. I was playing, how can you be playing ball? Well, the mayor of San Francisco, you know who he used to be, Gavin Newsom, had a bachelor's party, and I was invited, and we got to play baseball under the lights because he was the mayor. And I hit a ball way out to the warning track, and I was running around. I'm really slow, but I mean, I could hit the ball well, but I can't get it out. I was going to try to inside the ballpark home run, and I was barely going to make it to third base. So I slid into third base at age 47. I had not slid into a base in 36 years, and I broke my ankle. So what I didn't know at the time is that I had a cut on my leg. I cut my leg, and I got fertilizer in my leg. Do not get fertilizer in your leg, because what happens is your leg goes septic. I was in Montana a week later, almost had my leg amputated. And then I got on these strong antibiotics and was off to St. Louis again to give another speech. I should never have gone to St. Louis again. I don't like St. Louis, for all kinds of reasons. In fact, yes, right? We don't like those Cardinals. But I don't like St. Louis for all kinds of reasons, because that's where I was when I found out about Chip. And that's where I was when I was on stage, like I am right now, and at the end of my speech, on crutches, on antibiotics, I went flatline. I died on stage. I first went unconscious for 5 minutes, and the paramedics showed up about a minute before I went flatline. They had put heart monitors on me at that point, and I just died. And for the next 90 minutes, I kept dying, and they kept reviving me in the ambulance to the hospital. So I had a death wish. To be honest with you, I had a death wish that I didn't want to be in the identity I was in as the CEO of this company that I'd been in for 22 years, and I was sort of like the tiny, minuscule version of Richard Branson in my own company. I was the icon for the company, and I didn't want to be that anymore. I knew I wanted to do something new, but I felt completely trapped. They never figured out exactly what was wrong with me. But that night, after being in the emergency room in the ICU, I was in my own little private room, and I created what I call an emotional equation. And many of you got the book when you came in, and I'm glad you did. I had no idea when I was on my deathbed that I was going to write a book about this. What at that point I knew is that I needed to figure out how to take Viktor Frankl's really profound book about meaning and turn it into something in my own life. I turned it into an equation, not because I'm a mathematician. Some of you in the room are a lot better at math than I am. But I turned it into an equation because math is about solutions. How do you create a solution? And something that's concise and that was actionable. So if I were to actually take Man's Search for Meaning and turn it into an equation, this would be that equation. And it became my equation that saved my life. And it might save your life if you are an entrepreneur in a desperate place. Let me explain the sacred algebra to you. The spirit equals suffering minus meaning. Suffering is sort of a constant in life, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially in a rough economy. For me, I had so much bad stuff happening to me. All I was doing was focusing on the bad stuff. If you're a Buddhist, the first noble truth of Buddhism is suffering is ever present. So I said, well, suffering is the constant, and meaning is the variable. If you increase the meaning, the despair goes down. And that's what I started to focus on. And for the next 3 months, between August of 2008 and November of 2008, I promise you, the economy did not get better. During that time, it got a lot worse. But what I started to see is that on a daily basis, I could look at the meaning. What's the lesson here today? At the end of each week, I would go home and write a list of emotions I learned that week. I learned courage, I learned humility, I learned resilience. And then I'd say, how is that emotion going to serve me next week? Then, in November of 2008, again, the world was falling apart, other than the fact we had a presidential election that I liked, what the results, but that was about the only thing that was going on that I liked. Everything else was pretty bad. I was giving a talk to our top 80 executives in the company, down in Santa Cruz. And I was supposed to give a cheerleading talk to tell them 2009 is going to be a banner year. And of course it wasn't. And I realized in the last 3 months what I learned a lot about was authenticity and vulnerability. And so instead of going up and giving my cheerleading speech, I got up and I actually showed them this equation. Because one thing I learned from Abe Maslow, because his family gave me his diaries for the last 10 years of his life, and what he wrote about in his last 10 years of his life in his diaries was psychohygiene. He says, great leaders and great organizations create great psychohygiene. What does that mean? It means the following. It means that when we are in the sweatbox of a startup, or in the sweatbox in my company at that point with almost 3,500 employees, and I was running out of cash, when we're in the sweatbox together, we need to have a figurative bath or shower together. We need to learn what it means to have a catharsis. And that's what we had on stage down in Santa Cruz, as I shared this equation and I said, in 2009, for the 80 of us, how are we going to collectively find some meaning? And in the next hour, it was miraculous how many people felt emotionally relieved that they could talk, and they could breathe, and they could be real with each other, which was exactly what we needed. And it gave us some strength. What it led me to at the end of my talk is someone came up to me and said, do you have an equation for jealousy? Jealousy. No, I don't. And then someone asked about, anxiety and happiness. So I decided to go and learn about happiness. I went to Bhutan, and I studied happiness in Bhutan because they have their gross national happiness index, and for 40 years they are the leading country in the world for studying happiness, and came up with this equation. Happiness is about wanting what you have, not having what you want. What does that mean? It means we need to learn how to practice gratitude a little bit more, as opposed to just pursue gratification, which is something that we as entrepreneurs can do quite a bit. What this taught me was every single day, I'm just going to go say thank you to 2 people in the company. Is that Saturday Night Fever? Yeah, so I would just say thank you to 2 people each day. I'd practice gratitude. It made me feel better, made someone else feel better in the company. Because frankly, in the worst of times, that's what we need, and it doesn't cost you a dime. And then there's this equation, anxiety. Anyone filled that one before? Anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness. Bottom line is, there are 2 ingredients that create anxiety in our life. It's what we don't know and what we can't control. If you want to help as a leader to create less anxiety in your organization, learn to be transparent. Learn to help create a little bit of certainty by helping people see beyond the fog. Learn to help people feel a sense of influence or something that they can implement so that they can actually have some power. I learned it the hard way, but it's very important. If I asked you in this room, if you had a choice, here's your choice. You have a choice. You can either get an electric shock now, it's twice as painful, or you can get an electric shock sometime in the next 24 hours randomly that's half as painful. Which would you choose? How many of you would choose, okay, electric shock now, twice as painful, or electric shock in the next 24 hours randomly, half as painful? How many of you would choose the pain now? How many of you would choose the random pain toward the next 24 hours? So you're just like everybody else. I'm so sorry to tell you that. 2/3, 1/3 of the US population, we want the pain now because psychological pain is more painful for most of us than physical pain. What does that mean for us as leaders? It means be transparent. Help people to see the certainty by being transparent. Help people to feel like they have some influence by giving them some sense of powerfulness. For 24 years, I was a CEO. CEOs are known as chief executive officers. I came to learn that I don't have to be superhuman to be a CEO. I thought I did. I just need to be a superhuman. And that CEOs are really chief emotions officers because Dan Goleman 17 years ago, wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, and what he proved was the following. 2/3 of the success of business leaders has to do with our EQ, and only 1/3 has to do with our IQ, or the level of experience we have in the job. And since then, there's been a huge amount of research that shows our emotions are contagious. If I smile at Blake here, he was already smiling before I smiled at him. So, in the petri dish that is our organization, our emotions are contagious. Whether that emotion is fear and anxiety, whether that's the thrill of victory, happiness, and we as the leaders are the emotional thermostats for the groups we lead. Where we set our thermostat has a lot to do with how the room feels. So, the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. And for me, one of the most fundamental pieces of being a human is to find meaning. 10 years ago, in that dot-com bust, I found meaning because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I realized that our employees who had a calling had a sense of meaning in what they did. In this most recent downturn on a personal level, when I was having my own existential crisis, I found that meaning, and that equation for meaning, was what gave me my life back. It helped me to also press the reset button on my life and ultimately sell my company and move on to my next calling, which is what I've done. So I'm a lot older than most of you in the room, and I just can say my experience in life, in this life, has been very much one of learning the meaning. And sometimes, as we all know, the most profound meaning comes in those greatest failures and in those times when we are most in that fog. So I just take my hat off to you. Back in my day, when I was a young entrepreneur, the last conference I ever would have gone to was a conference on failure. It was not probably high on my list. So the fact you're here today shows that you are very far along the path toward your own personal wisdom. So with that, I'm going to finish and open it up for Q&A. Thank you.